If you're sick of machine binding and want to try a new way to finish your quilt, I recently finished this quilt with a chunky hand stitch and I love it. It was so much fun and it went by way quicker than you would expect. Before I show you how I do this, just know there's probably way more than one way to do it. This is just the way I found I like. I'm using this 8-weight pearl cotton. I've used the DMC brand and Wonderfill and they both work great. First, I start by threading my needle and then I tie a quilter's knot at the end of the thread. If you're not sure how to tie a quilter's knot, you take the needle in one hand and the end of the thread in the other. They should almost make like a loop, only it'll be really big because your thread is long. And then I grab the thread like this, hold it against the needle, and then twist the longer end of the thread around 3 or 4 times. 3 is probably fine. You don't want your knot to be too large. It'll be too hard to pop into your project. Then I grab where that is wrapped around and I squeeze it between my fingers and pull it all the way down to the end of the thread, and this should give you a knot. If you're using thinner thread, you may need to wrap it around a few more times to get a larger knot. So the more times you wrap it around your needle before pulling it down, the larger your knot will be. I have already machine stitched my binding to the front of the quilt and now I am flipping over the folded edge and stitching it onto the back with this hand stitching. You may want to use clips to hold the binding down. I just held it with my hands the entire time. Clips would probably make it easier, especially if you're not used to doing this. So what we want to do is pop the knot into the fabric. So first I pick a spot and stick my needle in. This is not going to be right under the binding or on it or anything. It's just a few inches away from where I want to begin stitching. You'll want to make sure you only go through the backing fabric and maybe the batting, but not the front of your quilt, and then pull up the needle where you want to begin stitching. Pull your thread through until you get to the knot, and it should kind of get stuck at where you first stuck your needle in, and what we're going to do is kind of yank on it until the knot pops into the fabric. If the knot comes out the other end where your needle is coming out, that means the knot is not large enough, but it should get stuck there underneath where your needle came up. If you had a long tail beyond the knot, you might have to trim that back where that hole was, but otherwise the end of the thread and the knot should now be hidden. Now we can begin stitching. So I do this by sticking the needle in through the top of the binding, and then when you're underneath there, you want to make sure you're also grabbing your backing fabric, but not sticking the needle all the way through all of the layers. So if I kind of lift up the fold of the binding here, you should see that the needle is going through the backing fabric, but when I flip it over, it is not going through the front at all. By doing this, you're securing your binding down to the backing without having stitches show on the front of your quilt. And then I just repeat this over and over. So I brought the needle back up and you'll see here, I'm going through the backing fabric and then back up through the binding fabric. You can do 1 stitch at a time or a bunch at once, whatever you prefer, and then pull it through. When you pull your thread through, make sure not to pull on it too tight because you don't want the binding fabric to get bunched up, but you also don't want it to be loose. So just make sure it is nice and flat. I probably am not holding the needle how I would like to here, but the camera was kind of in the way and it made it a little difficult, but that is how I do the stitches. When you need to get more thread or you're ready to be done and you've gone all the way around your quilt, you will want to make another knot to end your stitches and secure it down. So what I do is I go through the binding fabric and through the backing, but I don't come back up through the binding. So now it is stitched down, and then I make another small stitch. This time though, before putting my needle in, I wrap the thread around my needle, just like in the beginning when we made a quilter's knot, we're making another quilter's knot. So it's kind of like a loop again, and then I wrap around 3 times. I don't want to do any more than that because if the knot is too large and I yank on it too much, my thread could break, and I don't want to break my thread when I've done all these stitches. So I'm just doing 3 loops, and then I stick the needle in and I'm holding the loops there with my pointer finger. You can't really see it, but it's below my pointer finger. And then I'm sticking the needle in and then back out. I travel down further through the backing and batting, not through the front. And then I pull the needle through. With those loops on the top of the needle there, it should make a knot right where my needle is going in. And then just like we did in the beginning, we are going to bury that needle by yanking on the thread, popping the knot into the fabric. And then I go ahead and trim that thread there once the knot is popped in. And that is it. That's how you do this chunky binding stitch, or at least how I do it. And I think it's a great little decorative detail.